So today I want to talk to you about how to use the clear glaze on your underglaze piece of pottery. So this is my shallow pinch pot, and it's been bisque fired. So right now the glaze feels really rough. It's not smooth to the touch, and it's also not usable for water, food, or drink until I apply the clear glaze and put it through the glaze fire. So the first thing I want to do is to rinse it. Now you can simply just go to the sink to do this, but I'm just going to take a damp sponge and I'm just going to wipe just to get off any dust. Now it usually just takes it a moment or two for it to dry. You can kind of see how that pottery dries. So the clear glaze I have in little cups, and I'll be giving you each a cup of clear glaze. And so I'm going to use probably my medium-sized brush today to put this on. Now, I haven't used this brush yet, so the bristles are very stiff at the top. So I'm just going to kind of put it in my bowl of water and loosen those bristles up. Okay, so you may have to do that if you haven't used your brush yet. And then I also have a piece of newspaper on the canvas. That's going to help prevent getting clear glaze on the table. So I just kind of waited a moment. I can tell if it's kind of dry. I just got a little bit more water on it with my finger. So I'll just wait. You can see that's drying as I'm speaking, and it'll just be a moment. So the thing about the clear glaze is that this is what I call a regular glossy glaze. So when you fire it, it's going to come back glossy. Okay? And so that means you cannot put the clear glaze where it's going to touch the kiln shelf. So that's going to be the bottom of my feet. Now I can glaze all around it, I just can't put it there. So if I set that on the table, I just want to make sure nothing dips down. It's just those feet. So I'm going to go ahead and start. And I want to put this glaze on not really thick. And I don't want to do a lot of over brushing. Again, over brushing is when you take your brush and you just keep going back and forth in one area for too long. That's going to cause it to get thick in one spot and thin in other spots, right? But I'm not globbing this glaze onto the pot. If I do, it's going to cause it to get milky in that area, and it won't look clear. So your colors won't look clear. Now I'm losing a few bristles from my brush. Don't worry about that. So you might not be able to see them, but there's one here. That's going to burn off in the kiln. So I'm not going to stress. Now, I can't go ahead and put my next layer of glaze on right away. Otherwise, I'm going to end up pushing the glaze. That's going to leave bare spots, and you're still going to feel how rough the clay is. So while I'm waiting for that to dry, I can put it on its feet, and I can do the top part. Again, you want to lay that glaze on. And I've got some texture, so I kind of have to work it into the texture, but I don't want to have any globs of glaze. That glob of glaze is going to cause it to look milky. It's going to look too thick, and then there's nothing we can do to fix that. There's absolutely nothing. So it's really going to matter how you apply your glaze. And again, I have to get into those little cracks because of my texture. So they're not like actual cracks, but it's where my texture's at. And I want to kind of swish my brush over the top just to make sure it's getting in there. Okay. Then I want to go down below and glaze the rest of the inside. Now I'm also losing more bristles. Don't try to pick them out. They'll burn off in the kiln, so it's just fine if your brush starts to lose a few of its bristles. Don't stress about it. Okay? So now I have to wait for this to dry. This is very, very, very important that you wait. I know that it's no fun to watch glaze dry, but if you're glazing your other pinch pots, you could put on a layer, let it dry really well. So it's almost dry, but it's not all the way dry on the top. And then if I flip it to the back side, we're almost dry as well. So the clear glaze looks kind of bluish. It will fire clear. Okay, so don't stress about that either, because some students are like, but it's not clear. It takes the heat of the kiln for the glaze to melt onto the piece of pottery, and then it actually will appear clear. So I'm almost dry. I'm almost ready for my second layer. So I'm going to flip my pot over. Again, I don't want to get the glaze on the bottom of the feet. That will make my pot stick to the kiln shelf. And I want to try to do nice big brush strokes. So from being in the studio with some of you glazing with the underglaze, don't glob. We don't want to glob this glaze. Some of you are globbing underglaze, and that could potentially mean we'll have some chipping that will occur. Hopefully not. But glazing is all about getting it nice and even. And I just kind of brush. Okay, so that's layer 2 on the bottom. And so now I can flip it over and go in for my second layer on the top. The first 2 layers generally dry very quickly, and then you have to wait quite a bit longer before you can put that next layer of glaze on to make your third coat. But if you overbrush, meaning you just keep brushing in the same spot, you're going to push the glaze to one area only, and then you're going to have spots that are rough and would need to be touched up. And that's okay. We can touch those areas up and refire it. But just remember, our quarter is a little bit different than most quarters, so we don't have a lot of extra time to correct glazing problems. We really want to try to get the glaze on appropriately the first time. So this is going to take a while to dry. You can see from the light that it's glistening. That's telling me that it's wet. If I were to put another layer on right away, I'm not going to get the glaze to stay, and that's where I'm going to have rough spots, and it's going to be patchy in appearance. And so I really, really, really want to make sure that I'm letting that dry. Is it fun to watch paint dry? No, but it's very, very important to the glazing process. Now, there's different ways to glaze. In the presentation that you went through, it talked about pouring, dipping, and brushing. Well, the clear coat can only be brushed. I know some of you are like, "Oh, I just want to pour it, it'll be easier." You're right, it would. But if you pour it, that's when you risk getting glaze too thick or having bare spots because it wasn't applied correctly. So with the clear glaze, you absolutely positively have to brush it. And so that's a really, really also important thing to remember about the clear glaze. So I'm still drying. I can see that it's still glistening. Now is not the time to apply that third layer. I really want to make sure that it's all the way dry. I can kind of check my bottom. I can feel that it's still a little bit wet under there. So I want to continue to let this piece dry. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. So my pinch pot is almost dry at this point. I still don't want to apply my next layer because I can still tell that it's wet. So it's really, really important that you give it the time that it needs to dry. You don't want to rush this process. But before I put my full third layer on, I can see I missed a spot. So I'm just going to touch that area up a little bit. And I do have quite a few bristles that fell out of my brush. The ceramic brushes are supposed to have soft natural hairs, so it's not uncommon for them to come out. And that's why, don't worry about it because they're going to burn off in the firing. They're not going to show. Okay, so now I feel my pot and it looks pretty good for drying. So I can go ahead and start my third and final layer. Now you have to remember what layer you are. If you put on just glaze and you're not paying attention, I'm not going to be able to tell you by looking at it if it's too thick or too thin. So it's really, really important that you pay attention to where you started. So maybe you're going to start by one side of your foot, kind of like I did with the underglazes, so that way you know where they are. So I don't want to continue to overbrush this. I didn't glob anything on. So I have pretty nice even coverage, and so that should mean that this will turn out nice and glossy. Now if I got any glaze on the bottom of my feet, I can use a damp sponge and very quickly just wipe that away. Okay, so you don't want to leave any type of clear glaze on the very bottom of your feet. That's what touches the kiln shelf, and so that's what's going to keep it from sticking. This glaze is glossy, and so it means it has a silica content. Silica is glass. So basically, this is liquid glass, and we're putting it on our pottery so that it melts, and then it's melting the liquid glass onto the piece. This allows the piece then to be washed. This allows the piece to hold liquid. It allows the piece to hold food. But you want to make sure that you have nice and glazed. So it looks like I missed a spot. So I'm just going to touch that area up. And that might have been when I was getting the glaze off the feet. So you can always wait till everything is completely dry. Now it's going to take this a while because I've applied 2 layers to it. But I think I can get my pot flipped over so that I can do the top side again. So I'm just going to go ahead and brush this 3rd layer on. So it takes 3 even, nice, consistent layers of glaze. Okay? You can't just put 1 on. It's not going to do anything. If you put 2 on, you might work out okay, but most likely not. So you need that 3rd layer, and you want to try to put it on as even as you can without glabbing it. If you have big, thick spots, it's not going to turn out right. So as this dries, it's going to continue to look kind of white and pasty. And then once it's 100% dry, I don't want to move it right now. It's not dry. I'm going to get fingerprints. That's going to take away from the evenness of the glaze. So once this is 100% dry, I'm going to ask where the kiln room is and put it on the glaze fire shelf. So some of you have been in there, or I've been taking some of your pottery pieces and putting in the kiln room for you. That works too. But once this has got nice 3 even layers, you can tell it's not dry. You can see it's glistening, it's glossy, and it's going to take it a few minutes. I'm not going to be able to move this for a while, and so this is just going to sit and dry, and then it'll be ready to be fired. Now, it's going to look like you can't see any of the colors. You might be able to see a little bit of color underneath that clear glaze coat or the coatings, but that's normal. So don't let that stress you out or freak you out like, oh, I can't see my other color. That's part of this process. So the underglaze goes on before our first firing, which is the bisque fire. When it comes back from the bisque fire, I simply took a sponge and just rinsed it off just to make sure there wasn't any dust or dirt that collected on the piece. And then I applied 3 even layers of the clear glaze. So now that I'm done with my clear glaze, I want to make sure that I put the lid back on the cup because I don't want that glaze to dry out. You're going to hold on to the clear glaze in your tote or in your cubby. If you don't have space in your tools or you're afraid of knocking it over, in your cubby's just fine. But that's your clear glaze to use for the quarter. And if you need more, of course, I can always refill it for you. But because the clear glaze would be like a community item in the classroom, it's just easier for you to have your own individual cup. And then as you need more, I can refill it for you. So that is how to finish off the underglazing process. So once this is dry, it'll get moved into the kiln room, and then I will put it into a glaze fire. So that's step 2. If you remember from learning how to underglaze, step 1 was applying the underglazes, being careful because it's on bone dry clay. Well, this was fired. I should still be careful so I don't drop it onto the floor or something, but it's not nearly as breakable now. It's a lot stronger. So that's how you're going to finish off those underglaze pieces.